I was still pressing my jacket against the officer's wound when the sirens finally arrived. Instead of relief, I looked up to see rifles pointed at me, their eyes full of suspicion as my own blood ran down my arm. In that moment, I realized the real fight was only just beginning. I never thought my life would quiet down the way it did after leaving the Marines. At 36, I traded in the dress blues for a pair of oil-stained coveralls and built a small routine around my garage in Dorchester. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I worked on transmissions and brake jobs, kept the bills paid, and tried my best to be both father and mother to my little girl, Abigail. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken my wife, Laura, from us. I still remember holding her hand in that sterile hospital room, watching her fight slip away no matter how tight I gripped her fingers. That night broke me in ways I didn't think could ever be put back together. After her funeral, I walked away from the military for good. Coming home to silence was unbearable, but coming home to nothing at all would have been worse. The only light that pulled me forward was Abigail. She had her mother's golden hair and those sharp blue eyes that could cut right through me. At 8 years old, she was already sharper than most adults, the kind of kid who tore through books like they were candy. Half the time I'd catch her reading out loud to our German shepherd, Rex, as if the dog could follow every word. Maybe he could. He always sat there, head tilted, as though hanging on the story. Rex had been a rash decision on my part. A puppy from the shelter I'd brought home 2 months after Laura's death. I figured Abigail needed something alive to love, something that wouldn't disappear on her like her mother had. He grew fast, lean and strong, all black and tan muscle, with eyes that never left her side. By the time he hit 70 pounds, it was clear he wasn't just a pet. He was her shadow and protector. Our neighborhood, though, had changed since the years when Laura and I first bought the house. What used to be a working-class block where folks knew each other by name had gotten rougher. The Iron Vultures motorcycle gang had pushed deeper into the area, bringing drugs and violence where kids used to ride bikes. People still called the police, but after too many scandals about crooked officers, trust in the badge had drained away. Folks kept their heads down now, hoping not to get caught in the middle. I told myself I didn't miss the uniform, that my fighting days were behind me. But every night when I locked the shop and walked Abigail home, I felt the tension in my shoulders, the same kind of edge I'd carried overseas. The difference was that this time I wasn't protecting Marines. I was protecting her. It was a fragile peace we lived in, one I clung to as hard as I could. What I didn't know was that it was about to shatter on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind that was supposed to be nothing more than a walk to the farmer's market. That Saturday started like any other. Abigail and I set out for the farmer's market 3 blocks from home, Rex padding along beside us without a leash. He never needed one. He stuck to us like glue, always alert, always watching. The air had that crisp edge of fall, the kind that hinted winter was on its way. Abigail chatted the whole walk, going on about some book she'd just finished, something with dragons and knights. I nodded, half listening, half thinking about the transmission job waiting for me at the garage. For a while, it felt ordinary, normal, and then it wasn't. We were passing the old parking garage on Hancock Street when the world split apart. The crack of gunfire tore through the morning air, sharp and violent, followed by screams and the panicked rush of people running for their lives. My instincts kicked in before I even thought about it. I shoved Abigail behind me, scanning the chaos as terrified faces blurred past. That's when I saw her. A police officer lay on the asphalt, her body twisted, one arm pressed against her shoulder where dark blood spread fast. Her sidearm had fallen just out of reach, and 2 figures in black moved through the shadows of the garage, weapons raised. She was trying to crawl toward cover, but I could see in the sluggish way she moved, she didn't have long. For a split second, I froze. My mind flashed back to Iraq, sand, heat, the weight of a rifle, the faces of men who never came home. I had sworn I'd left that life behind. I couldn't afford to throw myself back into danger. Abigail needed me whole and alive. But then I felt her small hand grip mine. Her voice came quiet but steady, cutting through the panic around us. "Dad, we have to help her." It hit me harder than the gunfire. My daughter was watching, waiting to see what kind of man her father really was. I spotted the corner store just 20 feet away. Margaret Wilson, the shop owner, stood inside, peering out with wide, frightened eyes. Without a second thought, I scooped Abigail into my arms and ran her to the door. I pushed her inside, handing her off to Margaret before she could protest. Call 911. Keep her safe. Don't let her watch. The words left my mouth steady, even though my chest pounded. Abigail tried to cling to me, but I pulled free. Before my rational mind could stop me, I was running, not away from the gunfire, but straight toward it. The distance to the wounded officer stretched forever and vanished all at once. My boots slammed against the pavement, Rex lunging ahead with a burst of raw power. Bullets snapped through the air, one so close I felt the heat skim past my ear. Another sparked against the concrete by my knee, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, because in that moment, I knew. If I turned my back, it wouldn't just be the officer dying out there. It would be the man Abigail believed in. Rex reached her first. He planted himself between the officer and the gunman, his hackles raised, his teeth bared, and a roar of a bark ripping through the street. The sound echoed off the buildings like thunder, raw and primal. For a heartbeat, the gunfire stalled. Maybe they were surprised by the dog. Maybe they were reloading. I didn't care which. I slid the last few feet on my knees, skin tearing through my jeans, and hooked my arms under the officer. "I've got you," I muttered, not even sure if she could hear me over Rex's snarling and the resumed shots. She was heavier than I expected, her vest, gear, and blood loss turning her into dead weight. Another round cracked, and fire ripped across my upper arm. The bullet tore through fabric and skin, burning deep. I gritted my teeth and kept moving. My muscles, still conditioned from years of service, strained as I dragged her backward, using my body as a shield. Every step felt like it should have been my last, but quitting wasn't an option. Not with her life hanging on me. Not with Abigail's voice still echoing in my head. Rex darted in and out, never holding still long enough to be a target. He barked, lunged, and forced the shooters to stay off balance. 15 feet. 10. 5. Finally, the cover of a delivery truck loomed up like salvation. I yanked her behind it, collapsing to my knees. The officer's eyes were glassy, her face pale. Blood pulsed from her shoulder wound, faster than she could hold it back. I ripped off my jacket and pressed it hard against the injury. "Stay with me," I said firmly, slipping into combat first aid mode. "Look at me. What's your name?" "Blake," she rasped, voice thin and shaky. "Amanda Blake." "All right, Amanda. You're not going anywhere. Help's on the way." The sirens were close now, a wail bouncing through the narrow streets. My own arm throbbed, warm blood seeping down to my wrist, but that had to wait. I kept steady pressure on her wound, checking her pulse with my free hand, my eyes never leaving hers. Rex circled back, chest heaving, muzzle frothy from barking. He stood guard, still alert, but calmer now that we had some cover. By then, the shooters had melted into the alleys, ghosts disappearing into streets they knew better than anyone. I thought it was over. But as the first cruisers screeched onto the block and uniforms swarmed in, I realized fast that the real fight hadn't even started. When the patrol cars screeched up, I expected relief. What I got instead were drawn weapons pointed at me. To them, all they saw was a blood-covered man crouched over one of their own, with a German shepherd growling at anyone who came too close. "Threat, not rescue. Hands where we can see them. Step away from the officer," someone shouted. "I'm trying to save her," I barked back, keeping my palms pressed on Amanda's wound. "She's lost a lot of blood. Don't make me stop." They didn't lower their guns. More shouting, more orders, but I held firm. The officer needed pressure on that wound more than I needed to prove I wasn't the enemy. Then he showed up. Sergeant Dante Cross stepped out of a black SUV like he owned the place. Tall, lean, blonde hair too perfect to be natural, eyes like cold slate that didn't blink enough. He didn't even look at Amanda as paramedics rushed her onto a stretcher. His gaze locked on me, studying me like I'd already been convicted. "Secure the civilian," he ordered flatly. "Control the dog. Get Blake to the hospital." Within seconds, hands were on me, dragging me away from the delivery truck. Someone yanked Rex by a catchpole, and his furious barking cut into my chest like knives. "Easy, boy," I shouted, straining against the cuffs they slapped on my wrists. But my words meant nothing. He was hauled off toward an animal control van like some rabid stray. Then I caught sight of Abigail. Margaret from the corner store was holding her, trying to shield her eyes as I was shoved into the back of a cruiser. Abigail's face was wet, twisted in panic, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear through the noise. The look she gave me, that desperate, pleading look, was worse than any bullet I'd ever taken. Child Protective Services took her not long after. I didn't even get to tell her it was going to be all right. The next hours blurred into a nightmare. My arm was patched up by an EMT like I was just another box to check, and then I was locked in a gray-walled interview room that smelled like old coffee. A scarred metal table separated me from Cross, who sat across with a file already in his hands. He didn't start with questions. He started with accusations, wrapped in the calm tone of a man who already knew the answers he wanted. "Former Marine," he said, skimming the file like he'd memorized it already. "PTSD after discharge. Lost your wife 3 years ago. That's a lot of trauma, Mr. Carter. Sometimes trauma makes people do unpredictable things, like saving a police officer in just the right place at just the right time." I knew the tactic: psychological warfare, long pauses, pressure through suggestion. He wanted me to trip up, to admit to something I hadn't done. "I was taking my daughter to the farmer's market," I said, keeping my voice level. "Same route every Saturday. You can check the cameras if you don't believe me." Cross leaned back in his chair, his smile thin and empty. "Convenient. A routine that puts you exactly where Officer Blake was ambushed. Makes you look less like a hero and more like a man with inside knowledge." I stared at him, my arm throbbing under the bandages. I'd faced insurgents who played dirtier than this, and I knew the difference between an interrogation and a setup. And every instinct in me screamed that this was a setup. I thought once Amanda reached the hospital, the truth would clear itself up. She could tell them what happened, and I'd be back with Abigail before the day was over. But that's not how it went. Amanda woke up in a haze of painkillers and bright lights, only to find her rescuer, me, being treated like a suspect. She wasn't one to sit quietly. Even hooked to IVs, pale and weak from blood loss, she demanded access to a computer. The woman was stubborn, I'll give her that. What she found painted a picture that didn't fit Cross's story. My record was all there: combat tours, commendations, even a Bronze Star I never bragged about. I'd pulled 3 Marines out of an ambush in Afghanistan, carrying one of them on my back under fire. Not exactly the resume of a man planning to ambush a cop in Boston. She dug deeper. Bank records, work history, even the garage's employee statements. All boringly ordinary. Every dollar I had went into keeping Abigail clothed, fed, and saving for her college fund. My boss at the shop had nothing but good things to say. Honest, dependable, never missed work unless my kid was sick. Not a criminal, not a gang connection, just a mechanic trying to raise his daughter. Amanda's instincts told her the real danger wasn't me. It was inside her own department. She pulled up the Iron Vulture's file, and the pieces started lining up in ways no one wanted to admit. Their sudden rise matched perfectly with a series of mistakes in the evidence room. Guns marked for destruction somehow ended up in gang hands, their serial numbers matching police logs. Someone was feeding the Vultures weapons and intel, and that someone knew her exact surveillance position the morning she got hit. Cross had been too quick to pin everything on me. Too quick to dismiss witnesses, too quick to sideline the fact I'd saved her life. Amanda had been a cop long enough to recognize a man trying to bury the truth. Meanwhile, at the garage, crime scene techs were combing through my workbench like it was a cartel safe house. They weren't finding drugs or weapons, because there weren't any, but they did come across something worse: a listening device, professional grade, tucked beneath the bench. Internal Affairs was called in. That's when Constance Hale, an investigator with a reputation for sniffing out rot, stepped into the picture. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of no-nonsense woman who'd seen too much corruption to be surprised anymore. She took one look at the bug and said quietly to her partner, "This is department issue. Serial number traces back to us." When they dug into the authorization logs, one name came up: Sergeant Dante Cross. He had signed it out 6 weeks earlier for an authorized operation that didn't appear in any official file. Amanda was right. The ambush wasn't random. Cross had orchestrated the whole damn thing, and I was nothing more than a scapegoat. I'd been sitting in that gray interview room for 2 days, bleeding through my bandages, thinking maybe they'd just let me rot until Abigail forgot what her father looked like. Cross kept coming in, circling me like a shark, asking the same questions in different ways. He wasn't trying to find answers. He was trying to break me into giving him the one he wanted. What he didn't know was that Amanda Blake was just as stubborn as I was. Against doctor's orders, she signed herself out of the hospital, arms strapped tight in a sling. Face pale, but eyes burning with determination. She walked into the station and asked for Cross by name. When he appeared, he wore that same cold mask he always did, but I saw the flicker in his eyes when he spotted her alive and standing. "You should be recovering, Officer Blake," he said, smooth as oil. She didn't waste a second. "Nathan Carter saved my life. I'll testify to that. And I'll testify that my surveillance position was known to only 3 people. Myself, Lieutenant Morrison, and you." The room went still. Cops at their desks tried to look busy, but every ear strained to catch her words. Cross's face tightened, just a little, but enough. "You're obviously traumatized," he said coldly. "Be careful what accusations you make. They can end careers." Amanda didn't blink. Maybe I should talk to Internal Affairs about the missing weapons. About how the Iron Vultures always seem a step ahead. About the listening device found in Carter's garage. Yours, wasn't it? And then Constance Hale walked in like she'd been waiting for her cue. She carried a folder stamped with the IIA seal and looked Cross dead in the eye. "Sergeant Cross, I'm going to need you to come with me. We've got questions about some offshore deposits in an account under your wife's maiden name. 50 grand at last count." His composure cracked right there in front of everyone. His cheeks flushed, his jaw clenched, and for the first time, those gray eyes looked less like stone and more like a cornered animal. The house of cards was collapsing. Over the next hours, Internal Affairs laid out the rot piece by piece. Cross had started small, skimming cases and looking the other way for easy cash. Then Leon Marshall, head of the Iron Vultures, pulled him deeper. What began as protection money turned into full-blown partnership, supplying weapons, tipping them off about raids, and even setting up Amanda when her investigation got too close. The hit that morning was supposed to look like a gang job. If Amanda died, the Vultures stayed safe. If I died too, all the better, just a civilian in the wrong place, maybe even framed as her accomplice. Cross thought he had it airtight. But he hadn't counted on 2 things, Amanda surviving and me refusing to stay down. 3 days after Amanda called Cross out, the whole case turned into a full-scale operation. Internal Affairs had enough evidence to tie him to the Iron Vultures, and surveillance pointed to a warehouse by the harbor where the gang kept their weapons and cash. It wasn't just about cleaning up the streets anymore. It was about rooting out corruption that had rotted the department from the inside. Amanda pushed to be part of the raid despite still being stitched up. Constance didn't argue. She knew Amanda had earned her place, wound or not. As for me, I wasn't about to sit on the sidelines. They gave me a borrowed vest and clearance to work with one of the tactical teams. It wasn't official, but Constance said it plain. "You've already proven yourself once, Carter. Let's finish this." Rex was released from quarantine that morning. The second he saw me, he lunged forward, tail whipping like a hammer, whining as though he'd been gone for years. Abigail wasn't there. She was staying with Margaret until things settled, but Rex was all business once the team geared up. He'd grown into 70 pounds of muscle and instinct, and that night those instincts were worth more than any piece of tech. The rain came down hard, drumming on the metal roofs of the harbor as we moved in. Flashlights cut across the slick ground, radios crackling with clipped orders. I fell into formation like it was second nature, my body remembering a life I thought I'd left behind. Inside the maze of containers, Rex worked point with Officer Morrison, nose low, ears high. Twice he alerted before the scopes picked up movement. Both times, gang members were flushed out of hiding spots, cursing as they were dragged to the ground. Every bark of his sounded like a warning bell that the end was coming. But the real catch wasn't the foot soldiers, it was Cross. Constance had wired him, letting him walk into the warehouse under the pretense of warning Leon Marshall about the raid. His voice, cold and steady, spilled across the transmitter. "You've got to move the weapons tonight. IA is circling. I bought you until dawn, maybe less." That was all they needed. His own words sealed his fate. The floodlights flared, sirens wailed, and the raid crashed down like a hammer. The Vultures scattered, but Rex was already tracking, his snarls guiding us down side alleys and around crates. Gunfire erupted, shouts echoing in the rain, but the teams pressed in tight. Within minutes, 17 gang members were cuffed, and enough weapons were seized to arm a small army. Cross tried to slip out in the chaos, but Constance herself was waiting for him. When she clamped the cuffs on his wrists, his expression wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief, like he'd convinced himself he was untouchable. But not anymore. That night ended with Leon Marshall and half his lieutenants in custody, Cross in chains, and the vultures broken wide open. For the first time in years, Boston felt like it might breathe again. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe the fight had been worth it. The trial that followed was something the whole city watched. Courtrooms aren't usually packed for corruption cases, but this one had all the drama of a headline. The evidence was ironclad. Cross's wire recordings, his financial records, the weapons traced back to the evidence room. And then there was the footage. On the big screens, the jury and the public saw me charging into Gunfire, Rex shielding Amanda, and the two of us dragging her behind that delivery truck. You could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. Amanda testified with her arm in a sling, steady despite the weight of the moment. She walked them through the ambush, the missing weapons, and the setup that nearly cost her life. Her voice didn't shake once. When I took the stand, I kept it simple. I told them I was just a dad taking his daughter to the farmer's market, that I saw someone bleeding out and made a choice. The prosecutor asked the one question everyone wanted answered. "Mr. Carter, why did you risk your life that morning?" I didn't dress it up. I said, because my daughter was watching. She needed to know that when someone needs help, you don't weigh the odds, you act. That's what makes us human. Cross sat stone-faced through it all, but when the guilty verdicts came down, corruption, attempted murder, trafficking weapons, the mask finally cracked. He got 25 years. Leon Marshall, head of the Vultures, got life without parole. 17 other men went away for good, and the department rolled out reforms faster than I'd ever seen in my life. Afterward, the mayor handed me the Citizen's Medal of Valor. Cameras flashed as I stood there in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, Rex sitting at my feet, perfectly still. Abigail beamed from the front row, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. The medal didn't matter. What mattered was her face, that pride, that light. She didn't see a mechanic anymore. She saw the man she'd always believed I could be. Life changed in the small ways after that. Folks in the neighborhood started bringing their cars to the shop, sometimes just to shake my hand. Business tripled. I hired 2 assistants, put more away for Abigail's college, and started teaching self-defense and first aid at the community center. Rex even got certified as a therapy dog, with Abigail as his junior handler. They visited hospitals and schools together, bringing comfort to people who needed it most. Amanda came by the garage often at first, checking on my recovery, helping me through the maze of compensation paperwork. But over time, she stopped coming with excuses and just started coming. She taught Abigail chess, got roped into comic book debates, and filled a quiet spot at the table that had been empty for too long. Somewhere along the line, without either of us planning it, she wasn't just Officer Blake anymore. She was Amanda, and she belonged with us. 6 months after the shooting, Autumn painted Boston Common in gold and red. Abigail ran ahead, Rex chasing leaves beside her, while Amanda and I walked slower, the kind of silence between us that didn't need filling. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly, her arm brushing mine. "Not just for saving my life. For standing up when everyone else turned away. For showing Abigail what integrity looks like." I looked at her, the sun catching the flecks of amber in her eyes. "You fought for me when no one else did. That's thanks enough." She stopped walking, turned to face me fully. "No, Nathan. It's not. I came to your house to thank a hero. I stayed because I found a family." Her words hit me harder than Gunfire ever had. I reached for her hand, our fingers locking together like it had always been meant that way. Abigail saw us from a few yards away and came running, Rex at her heels. She spotted our joined hands and grinned so wide it could have lit the whole city. "Are you two finally getting married?" she blurted with the blunt honesty only an 8-year-old has. "Because Rex and I have been waiting forever." Amanda laughed, bright and easy, while I shook my head. "We should probably date first, kiddo. Dating's for people who don't know each other," Abigail declared. "She already knows you leave your socks everywhere. You already know she can't cook anything but eggs. Rex knows she sneaks him treats when you're not looking. What else is there?" Rex barked once, as if agreeing. Amanda knelt down, meeting Abigail's eyes. "How would you feel if we really did become a family?" Abigail threw her arms around Amanda's neck so fast, she almost knocked her over. "I already picked out my dress for the wedding," she said, her voice muffled against Amanda's shoulder. "It's blue like Mom's was." My chest tightened, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from grief. It was from hope. 3 months later, on a clear winter morning, Amanda and I stood on the courthouse steps, exchanging vows in front of a small crowd. Abigail stood proudly as maid of honor, Rex the ring bearer with 2 gold bands tied to his collar. Morrison and Walsh were my groomsmen. Constance stood among the guests, and Margaret smiled from the front row. The judge who pronounced us husband and wife was the same one who had sent Cross away for good. When we kissed, Abigail cheered louder than anyone, and Rex barked until people laughed. The photographer caught the moment, our new family standing together, forged not by perfect beginnings, but by choice, by courage, and by love that had survived fire. After the ceremony, Amanda leaned close and whispered, "There's something we should tell Abigail." We found her playing with Rex by the courthouse steps. Amanda crouched down beside her. "Sweetheart, we've started the adoption process. His name is Marcus. He's 6. He lost his parents last year. We think he'd make a great little brother." Abigail's squeal of joy startled a flock of pigeons into the air. "I'm going to be a big sister. Does he like dogs? Will he read comics with me?" I lifted her into my arms, laughing as Rex barked along. For the first time since Laura's death, the weight in my chest was gone. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something worth protecting. A family, not born from perfect beginnings, but chosen, piece by piece, heart by heart. And I knew then that running into Gunfire that morning wasn't the most important rescue I'd ever made. The real rescue was here, holding tight to me, Amanda, Abigail, and Rex. And soon, Marcus too.